Well, Brian Callen, we've been on hiatus for a little while.
Yeah.
People have missed you.
Yes.
Voices crying out in the wilderness, being like, "Where's Brian?" So where have you been?
I've been living close to the bone, bro.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of stuff. Working on a TV show. Doing Fighter and Kid, as you know, and then touring a lot as a stand-up comic, trying to work on my next hour.
But yet, even though you're so busy and have so much going on,
I still read.
You're still reading, and you're still coming back to this podcast.
Yes.
Why are you coming back to this podcast?
Because I love talking to smart people like Mark Manson, etc.
Well, that's great. And I think that's, the goal of this podcast has always been to make smart convenient and to let you know that you don't have to buy into the story that you were born into and that you can create your own culture.
Yep.
And so that's what we're here to do.
Yeah, that's right. So I hope you guys take this journey with us. Yeah. All right.
And that's what I love so much about your work is that rather than trying to say that there's some fantasy version in which we escape the problem of human nature, you're like, we're stuck, we're fucked, we're stuck in human nature.
Everything is fucked.
Yeah. And so therefore, wrestle with that.
Yeah.
Well, accepting that we're flawed and that there's no utopia.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I my joke when I did this thing is I find scientists, are always like, I don't know, maybe sometimes it depends, and I think that's probably.
It's funny you say that because kind of coming from self-help blogging world, there was always a criticism of me and also an insecurity that I had of like, oh shit, I don't have a degree, like I'm not a scientist. And then I spent a few years researching everything, made some friends in academia, and it turns out, we don't know anything. Like,
well, dude, that's exactly how Hunter and I talk about
there's
this. There's
pretty much like in the social sciences, there's maybe 2 or 3 things in psychology that there's like really strong data for. Everything else is just a best guess.
That's exactly right. I mean, I think, and you do a great job of, I think, so we'll start with this, like, you seem to have done your homework. I feel like Nietzsche and Immanuel Kant were big influences for you.
Yeah.
Would you say that were you a philosophy major? Did you read a lot of philosophy?
No, I read some in college. It's funny because so my last book, Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, its success, it became so successful it kind of fucked with me.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know what to do with myself. And somehow I ended up going back to philosophy and reading it for the first time in probably 10 or 15 years. And coming back to it older as like a more experienced adult, I understood it more, but it also had Kant especially had a pretty profound impact in a way that I didn't expect.
In what way? So let's just go. So Mark Manson, obviously you guys, know this, but he wrote The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Yeah.
And everything is fucked.
Yes.
Which came out last week.
Yes.
A week ago, yeah.
Which I get a kick out of because, putting fucked, even me, I was like, I'm not reading that book. That looks like a, whatever, fucking dude's trying to get my attention. I can just see the publisher saying, and probably it's true. That's what you did.
Absolutely.
Because you were challenging narratives and you did that to me. And so then I had smart people like Reed over here recommend it and say it's one of his favorites. Then all of a sudden you say everybody who is intelligent, my wife included, is reading this book, and I'm like, the fucking all right.
Yeah, I'm slowly winning people over.
Yeah. but it's a very smart way to do it.
Yeah.
So but I'm sorry to interrupt. So tell me more about
what was
Immanuel Kant.
Yeah, what was inspiring about Kant? So I guess like the success of Subtle Art threw me into what you would call like a midlife crisis. It was like, oh shit, everything I had dreamed about my entire adult life just came true, and I'm still this fucking idiot who can't put on his shirt correctly half the time. And so I expected kind of this big change or this big release and this big satisfaction, and actually it brought a lot of anxiety, and it brought a lot of existential questions of like, well, now what? Like, what the hell am I supposed to do? And also, assuming that this is probably going to be like the most successful thing I ever do in my career.
Peaking early.
Yeah, it's like, well, why do anything else? And Kant was hugely inspiring because he has a very strict view on right and wrong, and on like how you should make decisions in your life. And he basically said, he's like, look, fuck your emotions. Fuck how it feels. Like, none of that stuff matters. He says there's a very clear and rational right and wrong in life. It's based on how you treat people. And you don't need to be inspired. You don't need to be calm. You don't need to be, not anxious, any of these things to continue to behave in that way. And
it's the categorical imperative, right?
Yeah, it's
behave in such a way as you would have others behave.
It's the categorical imperative is he basically said for anything to be ethically true, you have to be able to universalize it. Right. So if it's wrong for me to steal something, it has to be wrong for you, regardless of the situation.
Right.
There are a lot of kind of flaws with that. I mean, he's been criticized for centuries, but one of his categorical imperatives that I found hugely inspiring was the formula of humanity, which is never treat a person merely as a means, but always as an ends. And that just kind of like blew my hair back. I was like, wow, that's so simple and elegant. And as somebody who's been writing about like personal development and relationships for like 10 years, I'm like, shit, this guy just summed up like my entire career in a sentence.
Yeah, when I read that, I remember thinking that, there are these hard questions. Would you kill 20 million people today to save a billion people tomorrow?
Yeah.
Well, Kant would say no. Kant would say that's not how you do things. It's the reason that when Pinochet, I've heard people make an argument that in Pinochet's Chile, we tortured 3,000 people, or we made 3,000 people disappear and maybe tortured. And, they were leftists and they were intent on doing the same thing to us and destabilizing an entire country.
Yep.
So you had to break a couple of eggs to make an omelet. Well, you can't.
Yeah.
There's a reason that we, in the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War, when the CIA runs these secret prisons at a place called like the Salt Pit, and you chain a guy to a wall and he dies of, hypothermia, whatever it might be, we as Americans should be outraged.
Yes.
I don't care if you're in uniform or whatever. We should be like, listen, motherfucker. That's not acceptable.
Yeah.
Because we're Americans and we're at a higher standard. And the minute we lose that, that's my biggest fear with our assassination programs.
I agree, man. And I think what Kant would say, that whole you need to break some eggs to make an omelet, he would say two things. He would say one is that, the ends never justify the means. Like one thing he said you can't judge an action based on its context, based on its, you can't say like, oh, well, it worked out, therefore it was a good thing. It's like, no, it was either a good or bad thing when you did it, regardless of what the result was. The second thing he would say is probably, for every time, okay, so you broke some eggs to make an omelet, but how many times do you just break eggs? Like, you don't know, there's no guarantee that omelet's coming. So you can't like move through the world that way.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And that's a huge responsibility.
It is huge.
But I think that all of us know inherently it's right.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because when we do break eggs, no matter who you are, even the Nazis made moral justification for why it was.
Absolutely.
It's like hearing really religious people try to explain to me that the world was created 6,000 years ago and start using science to prove it.
Yeah.
I mean, scientifically, we have evidence that the Red Sea parted. I mean, I can show you, and you're like, whoa, bro, you're not allowed to now use science to prove. If you want to believe that, I understand the value in myth, but please already, you can't now hijack science that is against you. It's not, no, that's over there. Anyway.
Yeah. It's, it is one of the examples I used in this book. It's kind of, there's a little bit of a gotcha moment in the book. So I open up the book with a Holocaust story. And one reason I did that is because I feel like the Holocaust is the one thing in Western culture that we're pretty much unanimous on. Yeah. Like that everybody agrees that wasn't so good. Yeah, that was a pretty bad thing.
Wasn't so good.
Yeah.
Wasn't so good.
Yeah, didn't.
That's like my friend Dave said that he was at his friend's house and his father, just this big crusty old dude, goes, all I know is the Jews had to do something pretty bad for the Nazis to do
Oh
that.
my God.
And they were all, and my buddy's Jewish, and my buddy was like, fuck, I gotta get the fuck out. Wow. Oh God. My father once said to me, never follow. The Holocaust was bad, but never say but. Never say but.
There's never a but at the end of that
No.
sentence.
But go on, yeah.
So I started with the Holocaust story, and I started with a story of this amazing Polish guy, and so it's a very kind of traditional heroic story of this guy who resisted the Nazis, and I used him as an example of hope, and in kind of our typical vision of like how hope is a good thing. And then about halfway through the book, I pull the rug out from under the reader, and I point out that hope didn't just inspire the Polish guy. Hope actually inspired the Nazis.
Yeah.
Hope inspired the Soviet Union. Pretty much all the greatest atrocities that have ever occurred in humanity occurred because of hope.
Yeah.
They had some hope of like this great utopian future.
utopia. Yeah.
And that's
Very much like Game of Thrones.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Well, yeah, man.
I mean, that was what the finale was about. Is that it's
Spoilers.
literally- Yeah, spoiler
I will
alert.
liberate the world, and we
Yeah.
will do it at the edge of the point of a sword.
That's
Yeah.
right. And every atrocity she committed felt morally justified because of the context of them being slavers, them being overlords, them being this.
Yeah.
And, that's...
And they had a chance.
Yeah.
They had a chance at peace.
Which is why the message "everything is fucked" is actually a liberating message. Like
Yeah.
this is like with Subtle Art. I wrote a very pessimistic book. I tried to argue. It's like, look, humans are shit. All this stuff like you can do anything. The sky's the limit. Like I think that's kind of the tyrannical version of personal development. I think it's a liberating and healthy form of self-help is, look, we're all shit. Let's just try to be a little bit less shitty. And it's with this book, it's like, look, everything is fucked in the world. It's always been fucked in the world. And it's always going to be fucked in the world, no matter what we do. So the only way we can not completely just destroy everything is by understanding that. And
Well, I sent the Tom Waits quote to my buddy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was beautiful. I'd rather have a bottle in front of me than have a frontal lobotomy.
Yep.
And meaning that at least my dysfunction, right? Explain what you meant by what he meant by that, and what you think it means. 'Cause I love it.
I used it as an example of how it's better to be dysfunctional in life, but have a sense of meaning and purpose. Like even if you're
Because you say that. I mean, you say that the superpower basically isn't we have a feeling brain and we have a thinking brain.
Yeah.
And the thinking brain basically says that this is sort of what is.
Yeah.
And we do that by drawing associations and corollaries and things like that. And then the feeling brain essentially ranks things from good to worse.
Yes.
And what's good, what's bad, and we do all that. And we are basically feeling brain driven.
Yes.
Right? So there's no matter what you want to say, I don't give a shit who you are, whether you're a scientist or not. We're stories are what give us, values and
sense of meaning and
absolutely.
purpose, yeah.
We are all a product of the stories we have been told. We're all a product of the stories we tell ourselves.
Yep.
It's what the fabric of our identity. And you're not going to really be able to step out of the fact that you're driven by your feeling brain,
Yeah.
by what feels good, what makes you feel significant, and all those things. But the superpower, the way to get out of that is essentially to the meaning you attach
Yes.
to the feeling.
You can rewrite the narrative around your feelings.
Yeah, I thought that's
you
very
can
important.
you can decide.
So pain is inevitable. Suffering is a choice.
Yes.
It's the Buddhist
That's
idea.
one way to put it. Yeah.
And the other thing is that because we are such hypersocial creatures, you could use essentially peer review. You can have other people who see things that are missing from your narratives and have them challenge those narratives. So listening is also part of our superpower.
Yeah.
Right?
And also having people around you that aren't shitheads.
That's right. Well, and I mean, I in your latest book, like I love the whole section on just, it's great. It's very reverent. Like, how do you create a religion?
Yeah.
So maybe you could talk us through a little bit about like, what is Mark's 6-step plan for how to create a religion?
It's funny because you were asking me before we went live, like how the book's been received. And I've noticed that people who start hating the book, that's where I lose them.
Yeah.
So the 4th chapter in the book, it's very satirical. I kind of adopt this voice of a cheesy self-help infomercial. And it's like, I can make all your dreams come true. Just follow these 6 easy steps. And then the steps that I actually lay out are the steps of creating your own kind of religious cult. But throughout that, I also explain that this isn't just about traditional religions, that we form these kind of religious identities around things like
being a vegan, being a
free
market libertarian,
politics, sports teams,
even atheism is a religion.
Yeah, absolutely. Because everything ultimately, like coming back to the feeling brain, it's like whatever those values that you select for yourself, anything you value, that has to be based on some degree of faith. Like you can't prove that, being happy is better than anything else. Like that is just, you feel that way, and it's taken on a piece of faith that like, this is better for humanity, this is better for myself. And it's, once you find a group of people who have those same values as you, and you essentially share a faith. And so it can be something as stupid as like, being a Lakers fan. Well, not that being a Lakers fan is stupid, but I mean like something as superficial as being a Lakers fan.
Yeah.
Or it could be something as deep and profound as like, being a born again Christian, or, joining the military to fight for your country. Like your country is, it's this idea that came from Harari, that it's, these ideas of a country and a nation and an
They're
ethnicity.
Collective agreements.
They're all myths. They're all myths and narratives that we've bought into, and that we believe on faith that they are more important than anything else. Mm-hmm. And so we organize around those things. We draw lines around ourselves. We declare us versus them dichotomies, and then we fight for them. And that is actually what creates a sense of hope in our lives, creates a sense of meaning. And it's kind of fucked up.
Well, it's
because it basically implies that for us to have a sense of hope and meaning in our life, we have to reject something. And be against something.
Well, I also think you talk about,
there's a choice in terms of what we reject and what we're against, right?
Yes.
And that's,
well, that comes with personal responsibility.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And that's scary. That's where Nietzsche comes in. The idea that your job is to go from a camel to a lion means you are responsible for, you want to fully express yourself, have at it.
Yeah.
It's that nobody really wants to admit that you're actually totally free, but it takes a great deal of responsibility. We are, so much of our philosophy has been given to us, and it feels right, or it works.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things about the Judeo-Christian ethic that work. I mean, there are a lot of things about Islam that work for people. These are tried and true things, but then there's also the scientific method, and so much of our ethical and moral sort of landscape has been planted by these strong monolithic mythologies that for the most part are very positive. But the truth is that you talk a little bit, I think, about the sort of Nietzsche's notion that if you had to relive your life over and over again.
Yes, eternal recurrence.
How would you live your life? It's up to you to turn your life into a beautiful circus, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that was Nietzsche's kind of, I guess, test for your decision making and what
beyond
you do with
good
your
and
life.
evil.
Yeah, exactly. It's like if you had to live this decision forever, for all eternity, would you still make this decision? Which is hard to think about.
Yeah.
Like it kind of, you get a headache pretty quickly thinking about that.
Well, there are cynical ways. Again, it goes back to what you were saying about attaching meaning to something, right?
Yeah.
So when I see when you see a child who needs food, well, there are two ways to look at that. I just want that kid to be okay.
Yeah.
And I have a deep natural impulse to help that child.
Yeah.
I want to feed that child and make sure that child's okay. Okay, fine. But then the cynic would say, well, you're doing that because you have a feeling you want to get rid of.
Yeah.
And it's a selfish act. Well, okay, dude. I mean, all right, fuck off. I mean, I can't, the problem with that cynicism is I can't actually organize a society around that.
Sure.
I can't. I know it's super honest, and I don't even know if I agree with it.
But I don't think it's honest.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's this is what Adam Hansen, he's an innovation guy we've had on the podcast a bunch of times. Negativity appears profound.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
somehow we think that being negative is more honest, but it's just a different story.
Yeah.
And like any story, it captures certain feature that the other story doesn't capture, but the truth exists at the intersection of multiple perspectives. Like that's where you get a more realistic thing. And I mean, I think a lot of what your work is about is just the fact that, there's often this idea that you can escape the human condition and stop being a storyteller. And you can't. Like you're always going to be telling some story. So what story actually leads to the outcomes that you can feel proud about and feel good about if you were to make that choice over and over again?
Yeah.
And the reality is, okay, great. Like I could sit on the sidelines and be like, you're only helping that child because it alleviates your pain.
Yeah,
but I don't want to live that way.
I want to help that
The
child.
child. Exactly.
Well, and the beautiful thing about Kant is he would say it doesn't matter.
yeah.
Doesn't matter.
It's like you're treating the child as an end, you're treating yourself as an end, so it's okay.
Yeah. That's
like-
a really profound, that's a very, very profound, and also you can see why Kant is like, whenever philosophers teach philosophy,
Yeah.
you
can't get around them.
Kant requires like a semester.
Yeah.
Like you know what I mean? Like, well, we gotta dedicate a bunch. We gotta stop for a second, and it seems to me that you did the right kinds of reading.
Yeah.
So can you tell us sort of where you're, like, tell me, because you do seem at 35 to be super clear, and I always appreciate when somebody comes along and makes these things so accessible. And I'm going through. It's funny as I'm writing my now going to be my 4th comedy special.
Mm-hmm.
You have to kind of really key into where you're at in your life. And I realize that so many of the narratives that were given to me, so many of the stories so many of the notions around masculinity, my political philosophy, all these things were given to me.
Yep.
And they aren't necessarily, they don't necessarily gel or mesh with who I truly am. Right.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing to confront.
Yeah.
And a lot of what's helped me is some of these wisdoms that you're touching on.
Sure.
But can you tell me a little bit about, at 35 years old, who are your thinkers? You've mentioned Yuval Harari.
Yeah.
You've mentioned Kant. You've mentioned Nietzsche.
Oh yeah.
But you seem to really have thought out this. You've really taken this on as a responsibility, how to turn your life into.
I mean,
a circus.
to give you a little bit of background, I think I went through one of these kind of advantageous, not traumas, but like adversity very early in life. So I grew up in Texas. I grew up outside of Austin, which back in the day was actually super conservative. The county I grew up in, Williamson County, is like one of the most conservative counties in all of Texas. Which is
God, guts, and guns.
Yeah, which is really fucking conservative. So the joke I always make is I say that, when you grow up kind of outside the city in Texas, there's really only 2 things people care about. That's football and Jesus, and in that order, usually. And I was a terrible athlete, and I never did the whole Jesus thing. Like
you're going to hell, but keep going.
Well,
I mean, look. There are certain truths that we can all agree on.
Yeah.
And scientifically, even scientists
have proved.
But keep going. I can show you 2 YouTube videos that you're gonna fucking.
Yeah, but the old joke about hell, right? The climate sucks, but the company's great.
Yeah.
Damn right.
So from a very young age, I think I stopped believing in God when I was probably 11 or 12. Discovered like Marilyn Manson and internet porn, and it was kind of like all downhill from there. So I lived my adolescence was like a pretty lonely, ostracized adolescence. I was that kid with the greasy dark hair and the big Marilyn Manson shirt, and I'd get shoved in the lockers and shit. But I was still forced to I went to a Christian private school, so I was forced to go to church all the fucking time. And I was like, well, if I don't believe this, I should probably find something I believe. And so I started reading, and it's actually funny because Marilyn Manson at the time, that was his big message, is he was like, it's exactly what you just said, is he said, don't buy into the narrative that you grew up with. Go out.
He was a big reader. He is a big reader. He's a nerd.
Reader. Yeah. And
like you'll see him in a coffee shop, like in reading.
Yeah. Like he
said something profound to Michael Moore in Searching for Columbine.
The Columbine thing? He had the
said,
best
what
line.
would you say to those kids if you could talk to him? He said, I wouldn't say anything. I would listen. And that's what he did.
Yep.
I went, fuck, man.
You're like, God damn, dude.
Yeah.
You're the smartest guy
You
on this
just
documentary.
He's the smartest guy in the documentary. Yeah.
So yeah, he was a huge inspiration. So starting at like age 12, 13, like I started reading broadly about religion, tried to read some philosophy, but started reading about psychology, things like that. So this is just something I've been reading about since I was like 12, 13 years old. And it's always, and even though it made for a very shitty teenage experience, I was very blessed in that, like, I started wrestling with a lot of these questions at a very early age. And I got the hell out of Texas.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's the thing for all of us is that, we were all outsiders. Like Brian and I grew up all over the world.
Yeah.
So we were constantly moving between cultures.
Yeah.
And so you never have the experience of ever fitting in.
Yeah.
And you're constantly, and so for Brian, it was comedy, good looks, fucking ability, athletics.
Say athletics.
Dance.
Say that one more time. Say
athletics,
again.
like a lot of athletics. Like, so that's how he fit in.
Did you say fucking?
Fucking, I did.
Fucking ability, yeah.
I fuck. Hey, one thing about me, Mark, I fuck.
I fuck.
Yeah, and this guy fucks.
Yeah.
Shoving 2 thumbs in myself. You know what I mean, bro? You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I'm like 30, bro. I mean, biologically, I just did my checkup. Biologically, I can show you the charts. Duh, bro, my test is off the roof. Off the roof.
I love that they call it test as well. It's like we're so like buddy with testosterone that we can call it by its a nickname.
Test. Yeah, but you got to look at your free, like you're sipping they're different. All right, you guys have a minute?
Let me explain my religion
like what,
for you.
Yeah, there's testosterone that's available to you during the day. I always say it.
It's like the worst version of the Sermon on the Mount, like the testosterone like message on the Mount.
Thing. I sent my buddy Lou Schneider, who's a producer on Schooled, and I'm sorry, on Goldberg's, and I love to send him. Like every time we're shooting, I come over and I go, Lou, the one thing that guys don't understand is you got elbows. Why don't people use their elbows more when you're in close? If you're fighting, the hardest thing on your body, he's like, elbows, right? He starts writing. And then I just sent him text like, dude, I can't believe nobody does wrist curls anymore. Like, how are you not doing wrist curls? You're neglecting the best part, the most important part of your body. Am I right? And he's like, dude, no doubt. It's just, I love bro culture. Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't even remember what the
doesn't
fuck
matter.
we were talking
It doesn't matter. No, we're talking about how third culture kids and how you grew up, and so it does. It kind of like when you're on the outside looking in.
It forces you to wrestle.
Yeah, but
with
you've
this
done
stuff.
something unique. I mean, you've clearly hit a sort of a nerve here, and I think the hardest thing for a guy like you, and frankly, when I'm writing stand up, but you've written this great book at a young age, and like nobody does that. Now you got to follow it up, which in a lot of ways you pretty much have in this book, it seems.
Thank you.
Yeah, and but it's very difficult to keep reinventing yourself, especially when you've thought something through, this deeply that seems to have hit, because there's a truth to it.
Yeah.
People feel. I find this philosophy that you've taken from a lot of different disciplines, and kind of put it in this really very digestible. It's very soothing to me.
There's a tension that I feel, and I'm still pretty early. I'd actually be curious to hear what you say about this in terms of like doing comedy specials. Like, there's a tension in me of like, keep being authentic, explore new territory, push myself creatively. But then it's like, well, that's the shit that people like hearing. Yes. And I know they like hearing that. So
what I would say to you is this. Part of like what happens when you're a comic is in the beginning you just write funny shit. Yeah. So the material for my first special, and I didn't really capture it in my first special, but that's okay because I'm an asshole. But but the material for my first special, I did an hour and 55 minutes in Toronto, and no one got up to go to the bathroom. I'm not trying to be a dick, but I used to just it was a machine gun thing.
Yeah.
And people would just laugh, and I knew I could. I used to have to pace it because I was like, I'm getting them to laugh so hard. I gotta, you can exhaust them.
Let
a
them
little
breathe.
bit.
Yeah.
I'm being honest. It sounds like, but that was the material.
Yeah.
And that's in some ways, as far as
I've
raw
experienced
laughs.
that at a comedy show, and it's funny because I haven't seen many comedy shows, but I saw Bill Burr last year.
Yeah, it's my boy.
And I was actually I was getting dizzy.
Bill will kill you.
I was getting dizzy. I was like,
Bill is
holy
the funniest.
shit.
I have a text that a voice message from him that was so funny because I watched him. I've been doing this a long time.
Yeah.
I'm pretty good at it.
Yeah.
And me and my buddy were laughing so hard. And I said to Bill, he came off the night. This is about 2-3 weeks ago. I go, dude, you're the best right now.
Yeah.
You're the best. I'm trying to write my new shit, and you just killed me. And he said, dude, I'm trying to write new stuff, and just hearing that was so nice.
Yeah.
Thank you, because I just, it's always a battle. And then he ended it with, go fuck yourself. I can't be nice for too long. It was great. But the point is that, so everybody faces this issue, whether it's, and what happens is, so when you first start doing stand up, the point I'm making is that I was just funny.
Yeah.
I was just trying to write shit that would just kill you. And it just came out. I wasn't I didn't think it was my place to say anything because I didn't think I had much to say.
Yeah.
Then I watched Kevin Hart's special, and he was talking about his dad, and I go, man, I know a lot about my dad's the same. My dad was a pretty big figure in my life. So a lot of what I wrote about was my father, and it was loosely themed. The third thing, after doing all these podcasts with Hunter and really kind of thinking about identity politics, thinking about how we identify as ourselves, and having the kind of guests we had on, I said, I'm scared of a lot of these ideas that are out here, and I'm worried that the wrong ideas are gaining traction.
Yep.
And maybe with my stand-up, I can do a small part in at least voicing those concerns. And so I wrote Complicated Apes.
Yeah.
And
how did that go?
It took me 2.5 years. It's been received really well. It's gone really well. And I'm proud of it. I think it's the best thing I've ever done, frankly.
Yeah.
But, and it's funny, listen, I've always, when it comes to making people laugh, it's I can do that well for an hour and 15. And I'm still doing that. But my point is that now I have to do this all over again. And the way to do it, my suggestion to you is that I think it's really good to sit back and really, without judgment, experience, witness what it is that is causing anxiety, what it is that is causing excitement, what it is that is causing any kind of a worry. What are you really, what are you actually mounting a defense against? I think about this stuff.
Yeah.
Like, why do I still get into a boxing ring and spar? What am I doing?
Yeah.
Why do I feel like I still have to stay strong? And I mean, I'm afraid of an invisible enemy.
Yeah.
And that's interesting to talk about. And so my suggestion to you is, yes, you've had these. I think this next book is going to be a hit.
Yeah.
Everything is fucked. And you're really good at that. Don't worry that you've peaked too early.
Yeah.
You still have a lot. Because this is creating a whole new set of problems for you.
Yes.
Getting everything you want, which is what happened to me this year, materially, and you have these goals. Well, fuck, man. I know that feeling.
Yeah.
I know that feeling well. And I'm older now, so I'm able to navigate it. I'm able not to listen to it too much.
Sure.
I talked to Jordan Peterson about that. I said, you become this superstar. He goes, I'm 57,
Yeah.
Thank God it happened now, because you're able to kind of, able to go, this is in a lot of ways just a big illusion.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it, what blindsided me so hard was my age.
Yeah.
Because it was in my mind, I'm like, I'm just starting my career.
Yeah.
And it's like, I've got to write another 15 books in my life. And I got to live up to this fucking thing.
But see, now you're defining yourself along very strong lines.
Yeah,
and I don't think you need to.
Yeah.
but that emotion or that thing, you can sit back and witness it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Sorry about my throat. But you can do that. You can kind of just without judgment. There's something very liberating about just feeling it, backing up.
Yeah. It's one thing you said about your last special that I think is really interesting, because I thought about this coming into this book. I think there's something in our culture right now, like philosophy is becoming cool.
Yeah.
And I think people, and it's not just in books, not just in comedy, you see it in TV, you're starting to see it in movies, like wrestling with a lot of these deeper subjects about values, what makes a life worth living, how do you cope with being inundated with all this like information and stress and terrible news all the time. Like it's emerging in the culture and its art
very much
in a very interesting way.
I think that's in large part because we all are increasingly having the experience of being outsiders.
Yeah.
Like, if you think about, that small town in Texas, once upon a time, you were only surrounded by people from that small town in Texas. Now, because of the information age, because of globalization, we're constantly being surrounded by all these other cultures.
Yeah.
And there is that what they call, anthropologists call cultural rich moments of like suddenly being like, hold on, we thought it was all about Jesus and football, but those people don't like Jesus or football.
Yeah.
Like,
well, we're all
great?
sharing sort of a similar experience. We all kind of, it's easier to kind of get a sense of what it's like to be each other. I did a sports radio program, and he said, how much you watch a lot of football? And I said, well, I'm going to lose a lot of your viewers here, but this whole CTE thing has kind of turned me off to it. And he said, dude,
me too.
You'd be amazed at how all of us feel. We all feel that way. And I went, damn, these are hardcore sports fans.
Yeah.
And the more information that gets out there, the more we're able to pull back the curtain from the magic trick.
Yeah.
It kind of forces you to assess
how
you're living your life, especially as we learn more about how our brains work.
Yes. Absolutely.
So.
And then that's why there's then the demand for the sort of the metacognitive tools of philosophy, of understanding, human cognition.
People who can zoom out and kind of show the big picture.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, I think that's also part of what, the exciting time is that essentially like, what Marilyn Manson was talking about all those years ago, like people are realizing, oh, wait, I don't just have to buy into the narrative that I was born into, and I can actually be intentional about doing it. And I think the end of your Reed sent us his highlight of quotes from your latest book that he loved. And one of the ones that he'd highlighted was that evidence as that life preserver.
Yes.
But I think the other thing is that we also really, and the one of the core parts of what has made science successful is that peer review and that community of peers. And I think that there's a real hunger for communities of people, and we've tried to create our own one of people who are also being intentional about their narratives.
Yes.
Because you can't do this stuff alone.
No.
Being responsive to evidence. And one of the things that I think is interesting, and Yuval Harari talks about this, is that there are other truths. Like, even though all men are created equal is not something you can prove mathematically or biologically, there's a very deep truth to it in that we all agree it kind of works.
Yeah.
It works very well.
Or it's worked better than anything else we found.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's interesting. I think that when people are only talking about being responsive to evidence and measurable data, well, there's something about a statement that you can't necessarily prove or quantify.
Yes.
But somehow it's measurable.
Yeah.
Somehow, right? I mean,
and this is, I think it's a little bit subtle in the new book, but that's actually an argument I kind of try to make, is that like, look, you can't just science everything. We have to have these value-based discussions and these value-based narratives. We have to have these kind of religious communities around certain ideas or principles or beliefs.
Because
clearly some produce better results than others.
Yes.
So we need to start looking at like, what is it that produces the best results for the most people? Yeah,
well, that's why Kant is still so relevant.
Yeah.
And I think, frankly, that's why religion is very relevant.
Absolutely.
Because, look, if you... the problem with being purely scientific and purely rational is that you can make an argument for throwing severely deformed children off a cliff.
Yeah.
I mean, spinal bifida and all these things that makes for a very hard life for people.
Yeah.
I know people that you can understand how cultures were like, this is not going to be good for this kid. We're gonna snuff this kid out. And I understand that because we have a limited number of resources. Let's give this to, the gifted kids or whatever it might be. Well, we don't do that.
Yeah.
And it was...
And also the other problem is that if you are actually a scientist, you recognize that your model of who is better and who is worse is still a story.
Yeah.
It's a story, and also it's impossible to quantify because human beings
based on faith.
It's based on faith.
Yeah.
And so the point is that what you've actually done, like what the eugenicists did is that they created a faith-based system that, guess what? We can reduce human ability to a single number.
Yeah.
And then based on that single number, we can now determine your fate and your outcome. And on the basis of that, therefore, we are morally justified in forced sterilizations.
Yeah.
And the fucking
because you're
Holocaust.
you're reducing people into a number. It goes back to trying to create a utopia.
Yep.
And also the idea that you, as a human being with all your instrumentation, can measure what someone is actually worth.
Pain and suffering.
And you don't know what somebody's morally worth.
Yeah.
The great thing about that all men are created equal is that we're all of the same moral worth. That's where a monolithic religion comes in, where it's like all of us are a sort of from the same father.
And this is classic Kant. Like Kant's argument was that any conscious creature has an inherent dignity that must be respected above all else.
Yes.
And so that was the top of Kant's pyramid,
Yeah.
is respecting consciousness. And this is why, I wanted to kind of bring Kant back into like the mainstream consciousness. But part of it too is I've never really been a fan of, I guess like utilitarian ethics or like people like stuff that like Sam Harris writes about and things like that. Like, I don't think you can measure suffering. And even if you could, well, there are a few problems. One is if you can measure suffering, you quickly find yourself in a lot of ethical quandaries. Like you just said, it's like, let's say a kid's born with like a really massive spinal defect or whatever. There are ethical arguments you can make that you are preventing suffering by just tossing it off a cliff, then rather than letting it live. And that it just leads you into all these like very awful conclusions if you kind of subscrib to that view. But the other side of that, and I spend a lot of both books arguing this, is that not only is suffering inevitable, but it's vital. Like we have to struggle and suffer because that's what allows us to generate that sense of meaning in our lives. It's that sacrifice or that sense that we went through some shit to experience something that, ultimately creates that sense of meaning and purpose for ourselves. And so when you're constantly trying to reduce that, you are actually unintentionally removing opportunities to create meaning and purpose in your life.
And you're also potentially then creating more suffering.
Yes.
Because I mean, what you notice is that people who are able to insulate themselves from suffering, whether it's the very famous or the very rich or the very powerful,
they
end
suffer.
up just storing up a whole lot more suffering because they've been able to buy away their problems or do whatever.
Or they just suffer for really stupid reasons.
Yeah.
And that's there's a chapter in the new book called Pain is a Universal Constant. And I basically lay out a lot of the psychological research that just shows that it's the more comfortable and convenient your life gets, you don't suffer less. You just start finding really, really dumb things to get upset about.
Yeah.
And I think that in a nutshell is kind of what's happened with our culture.
Yeah, the devil loves idle hands.
Yeah.
Like if you don't have something to actually worry about or work on, then your mind just creates other things. I think the other thing too is about the culture of convenience is that, if you look at most of these lifestyle diseases that we have that cause us so much suffering are because we spend so much of our lives being comfortable.
Yes.
You don't have to move around.
Yep.
You don't have to fight for calories. Everything is climate controlled. And the result is that you're essentially like a patient in a hospital bed in a coma and your body just atrophies.
Yep.
And that ultimately sets up way more suffering.
Yes.
Have you seen my workouts, bro?
Well, that's why. That's what it
Sorry.
actually
Sorry.
ultimately
Sorry,
comes
Mark.
back to.
That's what it is. Have you seen me fuck, bro?
Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. You understand. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that's a huge thing where there's a great deal of sort of freedom or value that comes from self-restriction, right? And you talk about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the other thing too is, you know, the idea of quantification. Like, it's amazing how many people who love numbers don't actually understand how numbers work. Like, the point is that let's say you're going to quantify suffering, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you instantly have had to define what is your metric, what is your measurement, and what is your scale, all of these things. Like, you've created all these constructs, right? Like, you don't have to look very hard at, you know, kilograms versus pounds and ounces, or, you know, Celsius versus Fahrenheit. Like, all of these scales are made up. And the nature of any scale is that it captures certain things and leaves certain things out.
Yeah.
So you create an IQ test, and, you know, why have they had to rewrite the IQ test 10,000 times? Because they're constantly realizing, oh shit, we made up the scale. It sort of made sense, but there were all these things we left out or things that we didn't include. And actually it's a bad approximation. Oh shit. And actually human beings are getting smarter over time. So we have to constantly renorm the test.
Yep.
So all of these, you know, constructs, these stories are designed to help us make sense of reality.
Yeah.
It's not that because it is a numbers-based story that it is reality.
Yes.
No, it's still just a fucking story.
Because the numbers are ultimately built on a construct which is based on human values, which is based on faith.
Yeah.
And so you can't get away from it.
And that's what I love so much about your work is that rather than trying to say that there's some fantasy version in which we escape the problem of human nature, you're like, we're stuck, we're fucked, we're stuck in human nature.
Everything is fucked.
Yeah. And so therefore, like, wrestle with that.
Yeah.
Well,
like,
accepting that we're flawed and that there's no utopia.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, Mark Manson, well done.
It's been great, guys.
Yeah.
This is fun.
Well done. And the book is called.
See you work out later.
Oh, you're gonna. Oh, yeah. Oh, you're gonna spot me, bro. You're gonna spot me.
bro.
Yeah, you're gonna get some chalk on your hands.
We're gonna get our test levels up.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna hug you, and I'm gonna hug you for
I'd like
a while.
to introduce you to your new God value.
Yeah.
This is your new God value.
Yeah, I'm your new
Brian.
God value. You're gonna get a tattoo.
Free test.
That's it.
Everything else.
That's right.
Yeah, bro. Let go of the brain, bro. We're gonna go run sprints. I went and ran sprints with Luke Rockhold, and that day, who is one of the greatest UFC fighters ever, and he's probably 6'4". I'll give him 6'3". 225, and just he's built like a Greek god. And he and I running sprints. I looked like the before and after. Like it was so bad. I couldn't walk for a.
What's Captain America before he's Captain America? Steve Rogers. Steve
Rogers
is Captain America.
Exactly right. And they couldn't even do that kind of CGI. They'd be like, I don't know, man. Even superheroes don't get that muscular. I mean, it's just fucking bullshit. Yeah, bro.
All right,
thank
guys.
you, man. Really, really good stuff. What's up? Where are you off to now? Are you doing a podcast tour?
I'm doing a lot of PR. So I'm doing like a speaking tour right now.
Have you done Rogan?
No, man. He's like top of the mountain right now.
I sent him some of your.
I would love to do
I sent
Rogan.
him. I'll show you the text I sent him.
But he is a very. I think he's one of those who's like he was like you. He's like he's just putting fuck in the title, get my attention.
Nah, but I'm.
But
he's you know.
yeah.
I've talked to him.
But he has a strict policy of like, don't call us, we'll call you. So
yeah. But I mean, he's my buddy, and I think
I'd love to go on Rogan.
I think you'd have a good time with him.
I think so too. I'm a fan.
Yeah, I would never recommend anybody I didn't think was worth it.
And you've had some good recommendations, Brian.
Yeah, you can see all the stuff I've sent him of your.
Oh, awesome! That's great. Thank you.
If Brian gets you on Rogan, will he be your God value then?
He will be. I will spot him to the end of my days.
Yes. You spot me. You spot me hard, bro.
I'll spot the fuck out of you.
I'll spot the fuck out
I'll be that guy in the gym who's like, you got this. Let's go.
I need your advice. You got this. And you're reading from Kant.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
While I'm forced to hold a horse stance. Come on, bro. I know your legs are burning, but treat your fucking legs like a means. but your body like an end. I don't understand what you're saying, Mark.
If you had to live this lift over and over again, what would you do?
Crack eggs to make an omelet, you bitch. Like, I'm so confused.
Dude, bro philosophers.
Bro philosophers, bro. Come on.
It's the
Write
new
that.
thing.
The new thing. Mark Manson, Everything is Fucked, author of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. Thank you for coming on the greatest podcast of all time. Ever.
Thanks for having me.